Wanna play?
Here's Johnny!
I need a bigger boat.
What's your favorite scary movie?
We have such sights to show you.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Hey everybody, welcome back to Wanna Play. My name is James McKenna, and today we're going to be going over the top 10 best things to watch on Shudder. So if you don't know what Shudder is a streaming service much like Netflix or Amazon Prime or HBO Max, something like that, but it's exclusively horror movies. There's hundreds of horror movies to choose from, and I decided today I'm going to give you the top 20 best things to watch on Shudder. Is this opinion based? It kind of is, but this list is going to be split up kind of into two parts. There's going to be the part in the beginning where I'm going to go over classics that maybe if you haven't seen and you can't find them anywhere, this is the place where you can find it. And then in the top 10, I'm going to talk about more obscure horror movies that maybe you haven't seen or haven't heard of that I strongly suggest. These movies aren't in any order particularly. These are just the top 20 best things to watch on Shudder. So without any further ado, let's get straight into it. So in at number 20 is not a movie at all, but that is actually a series, a mini-series that they have. They have a couple of mini-series on here, and the one that I've gone for is The Cursed Films. So The Cursed Films is a mini-series, as I said, where it goes through 5 movies that are supposedly cursed, and they give you all the behind-the-scenes info and why they are supposedly cursed, and it's very, very interesting. They talk about The Exorcist, The Omen, Poltergeist, Twilight Zone the movie, and The Crow. The Omen to me is the most interesting one. Like, that one is kind of mind-blowing, all the crazy stuff that goes on the set of The Omen. Just some insane coincidences. I won't spoil anything right now, but seriously, this is a very good series. It only has 5 episodes, so it's a very easy watch, and it's just super interesting to me. So it comes in at number 20. Coming in at number 19, once again, it's not a movie at all, but it is going to be a documentary, and that is In Search of Darkness, the definitive 80s horror documentary. So this documentary is really cool. I love how we get really all of the behind-the-scenes info on all these classic horror movies. Like, they talk about The Shining and Creepshow and all the Friday 13th and all the Halloweens and all Nightmare on Elm Street, Return of the Living Dead, The Thing. All of those classic horror movies are talked about on this documentary, and it's so awesome seeing the interviews of all the actors and directors and all of that, and the writers are there, Stephen King, Doug Bradley, all of them. It's just such a cool documentary, and it's super interesting to me to watch. So coming in at number 19 is going to be In Search of Darkness. You really should check this out if you are a fan of horror or just movies in general. This is a very cool documentary to watch. So coming in at number 19 is In Search of Darkness. Coming in at number 18 is Elvira, the Mistress of the Dark. So Elvira is a very fun 80s movie to me. It's about this girl who hosts a horror talk show and just kind of makes fun of them. Like, talks about, for example, the Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. And it's about this girl, Elvira, the Mistress of the Dark as they call her, who owns this basically talk show, as I said, going through just the weird and strange horror movies and making fun of them. But in this movie, it's just all about her life. And it takes place in Massachusetts. Matter of fact, only a couple towns over from where I live, so that's pretty fun. But yeah, this movie is very fun. I won't get into the details of it. That's just the basic premise. I won't really get into the details of any of these movies because I want you to check them out, maybe for the first time. So number 18 is Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. Number 17 is a Wes Craven classic, The Hills Have Eyes. The Hills Have Eyes is one of my all-time favorite horror movies, and I think it has one of the best atmospheres in horror history. It's got Pluto, played by Michael Berryman, and it's got all of his cannibal friends up in the hills that have eyes because of them. And it tells this basic kind of story about all these kids, teenage college students. I'm not entirely sure, but something like that. But they drive up and their car breaks down or something. I'm not getting into the minor details of it because I want you to check this out if you haven't already. But their car breaks down right in front of these hills. And I'll just let you watch the movie to find out what happens next. Number 16 is Reanimator. Reanimator is a super fun movie. Once again, another 80s one, and it just shows off some of the amazing practical effects that could be accomplished back then. You have Dr. Herbert West going around, he's kind of correcting his professor in college about, I guess, medicine or something, but he finds a way to inject this syringe into you in order to bring you back to life, but in some sort of Pet Cemetery type of way. You don't come back to life as your old self. You come back as some sort of evil zombie type thing, and it's just super fun. There's so many fun moments in this movie. Once again, not going to get into all the details because you should check this one out if you haven't already. So number 16 is Reanimator. Number 15 is Hellraiser, or if you prefer, Hellbound, Hellraiser 2. They're both on there, and just Hellraiser is one of the most interesting horror movies to me. It came out at a time where there wasn't too much going on. I mean, obviously there was classics at the time that this was released, but there was a lot of just kind of like sequels going on at the time. There wasn't too much originality. Horror wasn't really the powerhouse genre like it was in the early 80s, but along comes Hellraiser and it does something completely different. You get the introduction of Pinhead, obviously. You get Kirsty, one of the greatest final girls of all time, and you get the rest of the Cenobites too. The Cenobites in this one are awesome. By far the best Cenobites in the entire franchise. But just Hellraiser is another one that shows off what can be achieved with practical effects. It is amazing and it is a classic. If you haven't seen it, Shudder is the place to find it. Number 14 is one of the greatest slasher movies of all time, that is Black Christmas. Widely credited to be the original slasher movie, and it's not hard to see why. Black Christmas is phenomenal. It is one of the most atmospheric horror movies of all time, and it is a huge recommend. I think that Black Christmas is a seriously underrated horror movie that more people should go watch, and if you haven't seen it, as I've been saying, Shudder is the place to watch it. But this is a very creepy movie. You don't see the killer once, and it's just got a very nice and likable cast of characters. This is a slasher, so they are, I guess, killables, but they're all very developed, and you have a connection to all of these characters, and there are just some super creepy moments in this movie. There's a lot that makes you question it, of like what's really going on. It's a classic, it's Black Christmas, and it's on Shudder for you to watch at any time. Number 13 is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is another one of the most influential horror movies of all time. Another one that's credited to be the first slasher, but it's not really a slasher. But just the name value alone, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, is enough to make it on this list. I mean, you got some of the creepiest, most intense, the loudest, the craziest scenes in all of horror, and it doesn't really show any gore. It's all in your head, and that's what I love about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There's so much that it does different from every other horror movie that just makes it stick out so well, and it is on Shudder. I couldn't really find it anywhere until I got Shudder. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre was one of the later horror movies that I watched. Found it on Shudder, gave it a watch, and this movie is an absolute classic. It belongs on this list, and if you struggle to find it like me, Shudder is the place to go. And at number 12, the final one in the, I guess, classic horror movies part of this video, but that is Halloween, John Carpenter's original. They also have Halloween 4 and Halloween 5, but, I mean, they're not as good as the original Halloween, especially 5, but we're just gonna ignore that. But Halloween is such a classic horror movie. I mean, you've probably already seen it. If you haven't, then Shudder's the place to find it. I mean, it's got great quality, it's got It's got everything you want from John Carpenter's Halloween on Shudder. It is amazing. Halloween is one of the most classic horror movies of all time. Guarantee you watching this right now have at least heard of Halloween and Michael Myers. And if you somehow haven't seen this movie, then Shudder is the place to go. Starting us off in the more lesser known portion of this horror movie list, number 11 is Jack Frost. Jack Frost is a movie about a mutant killer snowman, as its sequel subtitle suggests. Unfortunately, Jack Frost 2, The Revenge of the Mutant Killer Snowman, isn't on Shudder, but the original is. I went into this movie really not expecting much of it. I thought that I was gonna be like, whatever, it's just another horror movie. But I found myself having a very fun time with this super low budget movie about a killer snowman. It's about a killer snowman. It's not the snowman, that piece of crap. It is literally a killer snowman, and it's super low budget. And if you're not convinced already, then I don't know what to tell you. Number 11 is Jack Frost. And at number 10 is Sleepaway Camp. Sleepaway Camp is a very, very fun, over-the-top, schlocky, insane 80s slasher movies with one of the most insane twists in all of horror. I won't spoil it, although you watching this, you probably already know what it is. But if you don't, seriously, go check this movie out before somehow you do find spoilers of it, because this movie is insane. Everything about it is over the top. It's super fun. It's just the perfect embodiment of 80s horror is Sleepaway Camp, and it deserves a placement on my list, and it is on Shudder for free. So go check it out on Shudder. Coming in at number 9 is Creepshow 2. Now, for those of you who absolutely love the original Creepshow for the absolute classic movie that it is, and are afraid to watch Creepshow 2 because you think it might ruin something about the original, let me tell you that is completely false. It's got the same crew behind it as the first one. It's got George Romero and Stephen King behind this whole movie, and it's just so good. I think the stories are ramped up to the next level because there's only 3 of them, so there's, I guess, more time to be had to focus on these stories, and I love how they flesh it out. There's only 3 stories, as I said, and I won't go into detail of what they are, but Creepshow 2 is fantastic. You don't really even need to see the first one, like there isn't any continuity there. So even if you haven't seen the first Creepshow, go check out Creepshow 2. It doesn't really matter, but if you have seen the original Creepshow and just want to see more from it, Creepshow 2 is the way to go. So coming in at number 9, Creepshow 2. And at number 8 is Demons. Demons is a film directed by Dario Argento, who also directed Suspiria. So, I mean, that right there should just tell you how good of a movie this is going to be. But Demons it's not as good as Suspiria, but it's still a super fun movie about this demon outbreak that takes place at a horror movie showing in the theaters. It's super fun. There's like scenes where these characters are like on motorcycles riding down the mall in the theater and just clotheslining all of these demons, and the demons look super insane, and it's just one of the best 80s horror movies out there. There's a common theme on this list. There's a lot of 80s horror movies, but that's kind of what Shudder really goes for, and 80s is like the best time for horror, and Demons is an example of that. Demons is a super fun movie that is super underrated, and it's on Shudder for all of you to go check out right now. And at number 7 is one of the most underrated slashers of all time. That is Madman. All you need to do is listen to the original Madman theme song, and you'll just have the tone and the mood set for you for the entire movie. The kills in this movie are great. The Madman Mars himself is just such a brute force for these characters to be running away from. And yes, it is a schlocky 80s slasher movie, but it's one of the best examples of that. It's another Friday the 13th ripoff movie, and there really hasn't been a bad Friday the 13th ripoff movie that's, I guess, from the 80s at least, and Madman is a very good example of that. Madman is super fun, and it's just great. Even if you don't want to watch this movie, just seek out, at least seek out the theme song. The theme song is amazing. It's what inspired me to actually go out and make a Crow's Nest theme song. I mean, I didn't make it, but it's the theme song that inspired me to actually get a Crow's Nest theme song made. It's just so good, and the movie itself is amazing as well, and it's such a big recommend for me. It's such an underrated horror slasher from the 80s, and it comes in at number 7. Coming in at number 6 is going to be The Burning. The Burning is another Friday the 13th ripoff 80s slasher, but I think it does Friday the 13th better than Friday the 13th does. It is probably my favorite 80s camp slasher out there because it's just so interesting. I mean, it's got one of, if not the single greatest massacre scenes of all time, at least in slashers. Like, oh my god, this dude Cropsy is amazing. We have some incredible shots from the movie that I wouldn't have expected from a low-budget 80s camp slasher. You have Tom Savini behind the makeup as well, so you know that this is going to be an amazing movie with some insane kills, and it absolutely is. I love Cropsy's backstory and how we watch it all play out through the film. It's such a good slasher movie. Probably my favorite 80s camp slasher, as I said, and it comes in at number 6. Number 5 is The Collector. The Collector is a late 2000s gorehound horror movie, but it is a very, very intense and good watch. First of all, Arkin is one of the best and most badass and tough final guys, I guess, in all of horror. He's just so cool watching him, how like he just tears himself apart to get out of these traps, and just, it's crazy. And also The Collector, I feel like The Collector himself, although he probably wasn't as good as he was in the sequel, just The Collector himself is just such a cool villain to me. There are just some amazing traps that this guy sets up, some amazing kills, and I just love, just like The Burning, watching how everything plays out throughout the film. The Collector is a seriously underrated horror movie and horror franchise that is actually going to get another sequel this very year later down the line. I can't wait for that. Coming in at number 5 is The Collector. Number 4 is probably the most psychological slasher in the 80s. That is Maniac. First off, Tom Savini's kill. It speaks for itself. Not gonna play a clip because I want you to go watch this movie. Tom Savini's kill. It's wow. But I love how this movie doesn't shy away from anything. Like, literally in the opening scene, it just shows this guy, his whole face, his whole body. It doesn't shy away from anything, and it just shows him going out and killing this person. And it's very, very psychological as it goes through. It's about this guy who basically takes girls up to like a hotel or something and just strangles them to death. But that's not all. No, it's not. He takes his little blade and cuts off their head, scalps them, takes their hair home, and puts it on mannequins, because this dude is absolutely a completely deranged, psychopathic lunatic who just... This is one of the most, maybe even the most messed up horror killers of all time. It's just an insanely brutal movie to watch. It's not as brutal as, say, The Collector or anything from, I guess, the 2000s, like Saw or anything like that, but going off of 80s standards, this movie is brutal. And it deserves a placement on my list, and it deserves your viewing on Shudder. And at number 3 is a movie starring Jamie Lee Curtis. That is Prom Night. Prom Night is another one of the best 80s slashers of all time, with a very cool killer he's not this over-the-top thing. He doesn't have an insane mask on. He's not going around just swiping through all these people. He's a guy basically with a ski mask on who's just chasing all these girls through their school on prom night. But I love the backstory of this whole film. The opening scene is super iconic, at least to me. it's just a very good movie. It's another one that I love watching play out, and it's just a super cool movie to watch. As I said, the killer is a very cool and unique killer, and it stars Jamie Lee Curtis, only a couple years after she was Laurie Strode in Halloween, and I bet 1 year before she was Laurie Strode again in Halloween 2. So she's gonna put in a great performance, and she does. Number 3, Prom Night. Coming in at number 2 is a movie that is seriously in the running for my favorite slasher movie of all time. That's Maniac Cop. So Maniac Cop is a late 80s slasher that stars Bruce Campbell and Tom Atkins, and if you're not already sold, then I have no clue what to tell you. But this is just a super fun and interesting slasher to watch, as this Maniac Cop, who you don't know who he is until the end, goes around Los Angeles and just kills people in just some insane ways. This guy is an absolute brute force. Absolutely nothing can stop him, and there are 2 sequels to the film that are also on Shudder. So if you want to watch more of this guy, Maniac Cop, then you can watch the sequels on Shudder as well. It's a 3-for-1 deal. Maniac Cop, though, is a super fun and interesting slasher movie, and it comes in at number 2. But coming in at number 1 is my favorite mockumentary of all time, that is Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. So Behind the Mask tells a story of this up-and-coming slasher, Leslie Vernon, who's planning his night out that's gonna elevate him to the level of the greats like Freddy, Michael, and Jason. And they do not shy away from referencing those guys. Like, holy crap, they reference like every horror movie imaginable in this, and it gets to the point where it's like, it's a fun nod to, alright, it's getting annoying now, all the way back around to this movie is incredible. There's an insane twist towards the end that I did not see coming, and it's just such a fun movie. You get some super funny scenes, funny characters. I love the scenes where he's explaining like how these slashers do their thing, like how they walk as the person is running and they still manage to catch up to them. And I just love how he like describes his plan, and it's just a fun, fake behind the scenes documentary of the upbringing of this new slasher in horror. I seriously wish that this movie got sequels, because if it did, I strongly believe this would be one of the classic horror franchises by now. It is a super fun horror movie. It's got so many great references to either the mainstream pop culture, but then there are also ones that you really need to understand if you have a deeper knowledge of the horror genre. It doesn't take away from anything if you're not, but if you have a deeper understanding, you're like, oh, I get it, and it's a super fun reference. It just makes you proud to be a horror fan watching this movie. It's super fun, and it is a super big recommend for me. It is The Rise of Leslie Vernon, and it is number 1. Thanks for watching my top 20 movies to watch on Shudder, and hopefully watching some of the actual movies on Shudder. If you don't have Shudder, as I said, it's a streaming service exclusively dedicated to horror, and it's just such a good site. Not only are there those 20 movies that I just talked about, but there's hundreds and hundreds of more. They have their own original series, they have their own original movies, and just Shudder is, if you're a horror fan and you don't have this is the absolute best place to watch your horror movies, because I mean on Netflix, what, they have The Bye-Bye Man? Yeah, this has like all the good, some of the bad. I mean, it has Cannibal Holocaust, but it's a very, very, very fun and probably one of my favorite streaming services out there, especially for any horror fan that either is deep into the genre or wants to know more, or just getting started on the genre and wants to know more, because this has just everything a horror fan would want. Shudder is amazing. Seriously, this is a huge recommended, and this video isn't sponsored, don't take it as that. I mean, maybe one day, but these are the top 20 best movies or TV series or documentaries or whatever to watch on Shudder. So thank you for watching, goodbye, and good night. Bang.